April 28, 2026, 6:14 in the morning. 22 Russian armored vehicles roll south through a dust corridor in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Engines loud, commanders confident, timeline tight. 6 T-80 BVM main battle tanks at the front. A Terminator fire support vehicle mid-column. 14 additional APCs and infantry fighting vehicles stretched across 4 kilometers of open approach. The Russian 58th Combined Arms Army had designated this push a flanking maneuver, a surgical stroke designed to fracture Ukrainian defensive alignment south of Orikhiv and pull armor reserves away from Toretsk. Russian planners had run the numbers, assessed the sector as thinly held, cleared the operation at corps level, committed the vehicles, pressed go. They were wrong about almost everything. Within 4 hours, that column ceased to exist as a combat unit. Not gradually, not partially, completely. Every armored vehicle destroyed or abandoned. Ukrainian losses that morning: 2 soldiers wounded. 1 Bradley with track damage. The flanking push on Orikhiv was stopped not by reinforcements, not by retreat, but by the most precise killing ground constructed on the southern front in months. Welcome to War Vector. I'm your host, where we analyze the battles that change wars. This is the story of how Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade spent 3 weeks building a trap and 4 hours springing it. The strategic picture in late April 2026 was one of grinding pressure across multiple Ukrainian defensive axes simultaneously. Russian planners at the 58th Combined Arms Army had been studying the Zaporizhzhia sector for weeks, looking for seams in Ukrainian coverage. The area south of Orikhiv had historically been a concern. Flat terrain intersected by a series of shallow ridgelines running east to west, ideal for armor movement if the approaches could be cleared. The corridor the Russians selected ran roughly 6 kilometers from their forward staging area to a position that, if seized, would allow indirect fire coverage over Ukrainian logistics nodes supplying the Toretsk direction. On paper, it was a coherent operational concept. The Russian intelligence assessment rested on 2 pillars. First, signals intercepts suggesting Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade had rotated through the area and emerged under strength. The intercepts were genuine, but critically misread. The brigade had rotated. It had also immediately begun repositioning. Second, Russian planners assessed the ridgeline terrain as offering limited hull-down opportunity for defending armor, believing their T-80 BVMs, with upgraded Contact 5 explosive reactive armor packages and modernized fire control systems, would dominate any direct engagement at typical ranges in that sector. The assessment was tactically plausible. It was also, as it turned out, catastrophically incomplete. The 47th Mechanized Brigade had been operating in the Zaporizhzhia direction since late 2025. By the second week of April 2026, their reconnaissance assets had begun picking up indicators of Russian preparation south of the line: vehicle movement, fuel convoy routing, the particular radio pattern that preceded coordinated armor operations. Brigade intelligence collated these indicators and presented a threat assessment. A mechanized push through the southern corridor was likely within a 2 to 3 week window. The brigade commander made a decision that would define the engagement. She, rather than request additional forces, which might trigger Russian surveillance and telegraph Ukrainian awareness of the plan, the 47th would use what it had, positioned with absolute precision. Over 21 days, working primarily at night to avoid Russian drone observation, the 47th moved its anti-armor assets into a 4-kilometer ridgeline overlooking the approach corridor. Stugna-P guided missile teams, Ukrainian-built, laser beam-riding anti-tank systems with a range out to 5,500 meters, and a tandem warhead capable of penetrating over 800 millimeters of rolled, homogeneous armor behind explosive, reactive armor packages, established firing positions along the reverse slope. They would fire, displace, fire again. Never silhouetted, never stationary long enough for Russian artillery to lock coordinates. 3 Bradley IFV sections moved into hull-down positions at the northern end of the ridge. Their upgraded Ukrainian-installed thermal sighting packages, allowing target acquisition in the pre-dawn light that would characterize the morning of the 28th. FPV drone teams, each carrying modified PG-7 munitions adapted for drone delivery, deployed forward observation posts in concealed positions along the corridor's eastern edge. The trap was set. What remained was waiting. Which weapon was deadlier in this engagement? The Stugna-P anti-tank missile, the Bradley IFV, or the FPV drone swarms? Comment A, B, or C below. We'll break down the actual kill numbers at the end. Russian column movement began at 5:40 in the morning. Ukrainian drone operators overhead, running a persistent overwatch pattern active since 3 a.m., tracked the column from its staging area. By 6 a.m., the drone feed was live at brigade command. Every vehicle was cataloged. Position in column, vehicle type, spacing, speed. The lead T-8 OBVM was designated Target 1. The Terminator, a BMPT fire support vehicle armed with 30mm autocannons and twin Ataka anti-tank missile launchers, was designated Priority Alpha. It was positioned 5th in the column, separated from the lead tanks by 3 APCs. Russian doctrine placed the Terminator there specifically to suppress infantry anti-tank teams attempting to engage the column's flanks. Ukrainian planners noted the position and assigned 2 dedicated FPV drone teams to hold against it alone until the heavier weapons had engaged the lead and rear vehicles and sealed the corridor. At 6:08 a.m., the column entered the pre-designated engagement boundary, the point at which Ukrainian fire control had pre-registered coordinates across the entire 4-kilometer approach zone. Every piece of ground the Russian vehicles were now crossing had been mapped, ranged, and entered into fire control systems days earlier. The column did not know this. Russian commanders had not detected the Ukrainian repositioning. The approach, in their assessment, was clear. Stay with me, because what happens in the next 18 minutes doesn't just destroy vehicles. It demonstrates something about modern combined arms defense that military academies will be studying for a generation. At 6:14 a.m., the lead T-80BVM crossed a ground marker that brigade drone operators had placed as the final trigger point. The tank was 2,200 meters from the nearest Stugna-P firing position. The Bradley section at the northern hull-down line had already acquired it on thermal, a clear heat signature against the cool morning ground. The Bradley commander waited for the engagement order. It came at 6:14 and 22 seconds. The first round was a 25mm armor-piercing discarding sabot from the Bradley's M242 Bushmaster chain gun. Not the killing shot, but the suppression and direction signal. The round impacted the T-80's left track assembly at the drive sprocket. The tank stopped, track thrown. The vehicle immediately behind, an APC, braked hard and slewed left. The column compressed. That compression was exactly what Ukrainian fire coordinators had calculated for. 6 seconds after the first Bradley round, a Stugna-P team on the southern ridge fired. The missile's flight time to a target at 2,400 meters is approximately 16 seconds. It tracked the lead T-80's turret, the missile's guidance laser holding lock as the crew inside attempted to traverse and acquire the source of incoming fire. The tandem warhead struck the turret ring at 6:14 and 42 seconds. The T-80BVM's ammunition storage, 45 rounds of 125mm main gun ammunition, cooked off in a secondary explosion, visible on drone feed for 12 kilometers. The tank did not burn, it detonated. Here's something that still bothers me, looking back at the engagement timeline. The Russian column had a Terminator, specifically designed to protect against exactly this type of anti-armor ambush. The BMPT-72 Terminator carries sensors, heavy autocannons, and anti-tank missiles. Its entire purpose is to see flank threats before they fire and suppress them. And yet, in the opening 60 seconds of this engagement, it did nothing effective. The reason, as post-battle analysis would show, was the thermal sighting limitation of the Terminator's fire control system, combined with the Ukrainian Stugna team's reverse slope positioning. The Terminator crew could see the Bradley, hull down at the ridge, but the Stugna teams firing from behind the ridgeline were invisible. The system protecting the column could only engage what it could see. The Ukrainians had made sure it couldn't see the most dangerous threats. 2 FPV drones launched toward the Terminator at 6:15 a.m. The first drone was jammed at 180 meters. Russian EW systems on the column were active and operating. The FPV team switched frequency. The second drone went to a backup channel. It closed on the Terminator's engine deck at 6:15 and 34 seconds, detonating its PG-7 warhead on the rear grille. The Terminator didn't explode. The FPV hit caused a mobility kill and engine fire, not catastrophic ammunition cook-off, but it was immobilized. And immobile, the vehicle blocking the column's midsection became an obstacle as much as a weapon. I spent hours going through the battle reconstruction data on this engagement, and one detail kept coming back. In the first 4 minutes of contact, the Russian column attempted no organized response. Individual vehicles fired. The surviving T-80SS traversed and put main gun rounds toward the Bradley positions, most falling short or impacting the ridge face below the hull-down line. But there was no coordinated effort to push through, no attempt to disperse, no ordered withdrawal. The column stopped in the kill zone and stayed there. This wasn't incompetence at the crew level. These were trained soldiers. This was a command failure. The absence of pre-planned contingency responses for the exact scenario they encountered suggests Russian planners genuinely did not believe this engagement could happen, as it did. How many armored vehicles did the 47th Mechanized Brigade destroy or put out of action during the 4-hour engagement south of Orikhiv? A. 19, B. 22, or C. All 22 plus the QRF vehicles that attempted entry at hour 3? Remember the answer. We'll come back to it. By 6:22 a.m., 8 minutes into contact, the situation at the front of the column was catastrophic. The lead T-80 was destroyed. The second T-80, attempting to push around the burning wreck, had been struck by a second Stugna shot that penetrated the lower glasses and detonated internally. Crew killed, vehicle burning but not exploding. The third and fourth vehicles, BMPs carrying Russian infantry, had stopped, hatches opening as troops attempted to dismount and find cover. Ukrainian FPV teams were waiting for exactly this moment. When Russian soldiers exited their vehicles, they entered open ground with no cover and FPV drones operating in suppression patterns that made organized movement toward the flanks impossible. Infantry dismount became infantry attrition. Within 6 minutes of their vehicles stopping, the dismounted troops were pinned, taking casualties, unable to form the kind of perimeter that might have allowed the column to organize a response. The Bradley section at the northern end of the ridge engaged its second target at 6:23 a.m. The T-80B VM-4th in column, now partially visible as the lead vehicles burned and smoke shifted, received a TOW-2B missile from hull-down range. The TOW-2B is a top attack variant, its warhead designed to strike the thinner roof armor of armored vehicles rather than the heavier frontal or side protection. At a range of 1,800 meters, the missile's flight time was approximately 8 seconds. It struck the T-80's turret roof. The penetration killed the commander and gunner. The driver attempted to reverse. The tank moved 40 meters before a second Stugna shot from a different team that had repositioned 200 meters east along the ridge, struck the hull, and stopped it permanently. Subscribe to War Vector if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, not the surface-level coverage, but the tactical decisions, the weapons specifications, the command failures and innovations that determine who wins and who doesn't. What this engagement reveals about the evolution of defensive combined arms tactics since 2022 worth sitting with. The 47th's approach wasn't improvised. It was the product of 4 years of institutional learning compressed into a single brigade-level operation. The integration of Stugna teams with Bradley sections and FPV drone operators, each working a defined lane with pre-assigned targets and coordinated timing, represented a level of combined arms synchronization that NATO doctrine manuals describe as ideal, but that most forces struggle to execute under combat conditions. Ukraine was executing it in pre-dawn darkness against a reinforced mechanized column with minimal communications overhead. Here's the take that might draw some disagreement. Russian military planners who authorized this operation without accounting for Ukrainian ISR capabilities and anti-armor repositioning weren't just overconfident, they were operating on a fundamentally outdated threat picture. The 58th Army knew the 47th existed. It knew the sector. What it apparently did not know, or chose not to incorporate, was the Ukrainian brigade's actual capability after months of rotational training with Western-supplied systems. That's not a battlefield failure. That's an intelligence failure at the operational level. And intelligence failures at that level don't come from bad luck. They come from institutional assumptions about your enemy that you've stopped checking against reality. At 6:47 a.m., 33 minutes into the engagement, Ukrainian fire coordinators assessed the front half of the column as neutralized. 4 T-80B VMs destroyed, 1 Terminator immobilized, 6 BMPs and APCs burning or abandoned. The rear of the column, still operational and backing away from the engagement, represented the remaining Russian ability to either push through or extract. Brigade Command decided to deny both options. Stugna teams that had been holding in reserve positions at the eastern end of the ridge began engaging vehicles in the rear of the column at 6:51 a.m. The geometry was precise. Shooting from the east, they were engaging the sides and rear of vehicles attempting to reverse northward. Rear armor on Russian APCs and BMPs is significantly thinner than frontal protection. The Stugna's warhead was more than adequate. 2 more vehicles stopped in the first 5 minutes of rear section engagement. Put yourself in the position of a Russian column commander at 7 a.m. on April 28, 2026. Your lead vehicles are destroyed. Your Terminator is burning. Your infantry dismount attempt has been suppressed. Vehicles trying to withdraw are being hit from the flank. You have no clear picture of how many anti-tank systems you're facing or where they are. Your artillery support request went out 11 minutes ago, and you've received acknowledgement, but no fire. And your radio communications with the rear are increasingly disrupted by what your EW operator tells you is active Ukrainian jamming. What is the tactically correct decision? Historically, the answer in this scenario is to push through. Commit the remaining combat power to forcing the engagement and accepting losses in exchange for breaking contact on the far side. The problem, on April 28th, was that the Ukrainian position at the far side of the kill zone was the Bradley section, hull down, fresh, with full ammunition loads. Pushing through meant running directly into a position that had already demonstrated it could destroy T-80S. There was no good option. The column was tactically trapped. At 7:18 a.m., Russian artillery finally opened fire on the ridgeline. It was significant. 152mm howitzer rounds, a battery firing for effect with coordinates that were close but not precise. The Stugna teams had rehearsed exactly this moment. Each team had a designated firing position and a designated alternate 150 to 300 meters away, connected by a pre-prepared route that allowed displacement in under 90 seconds. When Russian artillery began falling, teams fired their current shot, displaced immediately, and re-established in alternate positions. Two teams were forced to abandon their primary firing equipment. Stugna launcher units too heavy to move quickly under artillery. Both teams reached their alternate positions. Both resumed engaging. Ukrainian General Staff reports confirmed that no Stugna operators were killed or wounded during the artillery response phase. The equipment loss, 2 launcher units, had been accepted in pre-mission planning as a probable cost. The teams had prepared for it. This is the part that doesn't make sense on the surface until you understand how deep the preparation went. A unit that loses its primary weapon system during a firefight normally degrades sharply. The 47th's Stugna teams didn't degrade. They transitioned to alternate positions with pre-stored missiles and continued the engagement. That level of preparation doesn't happen in days. It reflects weeks of site reconnaissance, logistics pre-positioning, and rehearsal. The 47th had put that work in before the first Russian vehicle crossed the engagement boundary. Between 7:18 and 8:30 a.m., the engagement settled into a pattern of grinding attrition. Russian artillery continued to pound the general ridgeline area without achieving direct hits on Ukrainian firing positions. Ukrainian Stugna teams engaged targets of opportunity as Russian vehicles attempted movement. FPV drones maintained pressure on any Russian infantry attempting to organize in the open. Bradley sections held their positions, engaging only when clear targets presented themselves and otherwise maintaining concealment. At 8:44 a.m., 2 hours and 30 minutes into the engagement, Ukrainian drone operators detected a new Russian force approaching from the east. A quick reaction force, 6 vehicles, including 2 additional T-80BVMs and 4 APCs, moving along a secondary track that fed into the eastern end of the corridor. This was the Russian attempt to relieve or reinforce the engaged column. The QRF's route would bring it into the engagement area from a direction that the primary Ukrainian positions had not been optimized to cover, specifically the eastern approach, where the Stugna teams that had engaged rear elements of the column were now repositioning. The drone feed went immediately to brigade command. A new decision point. What would NATO have done differently in this defensive setup? Would different positioning, different weapons, or different command structures have improved on the 47th's result, or possibly done worse? Comment your analysis below. We read them. Brigade Command's response was rapid. two Stugna teams that had completed their displacement from the Russian artillery response were redirected to the eastern track. They reached firing positions, new ones, not pre-prepared, approximately 20 minutes before the QRF entered effective range. One Bradley section at the northern end of the ridge repositioned 400 meters east to cover the approach angle. FPV teams refueled and rearmed from forward cache positions, a logistics element that had been pre-staged exactly for this contingency, and reoriented to the eastern corridor. In less than 25 minutes, a defense built for the western approach had reconfigured to address a new threat vector. The QRF did not know this reconfiguration was happening. It was moving with what its commanders believed was a clear approach route. At 9:07 a.m., the QRF's lead T-80 entered the eastern end of the engagement corridor. A repositioned Stugna team fired at 2,100 meters. The missile flight time was approximately 14 seconds. The shot struck the T-80's left side, below the turret ring. The tank stopped. The QRF column, which had not yet spread into approach formation, compressed behind it. The Bradley section, now positioned to engage the eastern approach, opened fire with its main armament on the trailing APC. If you believe that preparation and ISR are what separate victory from defeat in modern armored warfare, type war vector in the comments. The second QRF-T-80 attempted to push past the lead vehicle. A second Stugna team, firing from a flanking angle, struck it in the engine deck at 9:09 a.m. Both lead tanks immobilized within 2 minutes of the QRF entering the corridor. The 4 remaining APCs attempted to reverse. 2 were struck by FPV drones during the reversal. 2 escaped. The only vehicles from either the original column or the QRF that successfully withdrew from the engagement area. By 10:18 a.m., Ukrainian fire coordinators were reporting no active Russian combat movement in the engagement zone. Artillery continued intermittently for another 40 minutes, but as unobserved suppression rather than targeted fire, an indicator that Russian commanders had lost the ability to direct fires on specific positions because they no longer had observation assets in the corridor. Ukrainian drone operators had been systematically targeting Russian observation drones throughout the engagement, using a combination of dedicated anti-drone teams and EW assets that disrupted Russian ISR coverage precisely as the engagement was most active. By mid-morning, Russian commanders were fighting blind, committing fires to grid squares rather than to identified targets. The battle damage assessment, compiled through drone imagery analysis and cross-referenced with combat footage captured by Ukrainian operators throughout the engagement, established the following. Of the original 22-vehicle Russian column, 19 vehicles were destroyed outright, burning, exploded, or so severely damaged as to be unrepairable in field conditions. 3 vehicles, including 2 BMPs from the midsection of the column, were abandoned by their crews and recovered by Ukrainian forces within the following 24 hours. From the QRF, 4 of 6 vehicles were destroyed or immobilized. 2 vehicles escaped. Total Russian armored vehicle loss from the engagement: 23 destroyed or captured, 2 escaped. Ukrainian General Staff reports confirmed that the engagement cost Russia approximately 40 to 50 personnel killed and an estimated 60 to 80 wounded, based on vehicle crew and infantry complement figures, cross-referenced with drone footage of dismount actions. The dollar value of the Russian loss, a figure that matters in the broader context of Russian military sustainability, was significant. Each T-80 BVM costs approximately $4 to $5 million in production terms. The Terminator, approximately $6 to $7 million. The combined vehicle loss in the engagement represents somewhere between $80 and $100 million in armored equipment, gone in 4 hours, against a Ukrainian force whose primary material loss was 2 Stugna launcher units and 1 Bradley with repairable track damage. Intercepted Russian communications from the period following the engagement, released in partially redacted form by Ukrainian military intelligence in early May 2026, showed the scale of command disruption the engagement caused. Officers at the 58th Army level were requesting full battle damage assessment for 72 hours after the fact, suggesting that initial reporting from the surviving units was so incomplete or contradictory that higher command couldn't establish a clear picture. One intercepted exchange referenced the engagement as a force structure event, requiring immediate doctrinal review, bureaucratic language that translated in practice to, "We sent a reinforced mechanized column into a kill zone and lost it completely, and we don't fully understand why." Here's a detail that stuck with me from the post-battle analysis. The Ukrainian thermal sighting packages installed on the 47th Bradleys, domestically produced upgrades that improved nighttime target acquisition range by approximately 30% over the standard M2A2 configuration, were reportedly developed through a partnership between a Ukrainian defense firm and engineers who had previously worked on agricultural thermal imaging systems. The same technology that monitors crop moisture in Ukrainian fields was adapted, refined, and integrated into IFV fire control systems that helped destroy 6 Russian main battle tanks in a single morning engagement. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. And that innovation loop, civilian expertise flowing into military application, iterated in real combat conditions, is one of the most consequential and underreported aspects of how Ukraine has sustained its defensive capability through 4 years of intensive warfare. The flanking pressure on Orikhiv from the southern corridor stopped on April 28, 2026. Russian 58th Army operations logs, reconstructed from subsequent intercepted communications, show no further mechanized push attempts through that specific corridor in the following weeks. The 47th Mechanized Brigade's action didn't just defeat an individual attack. It established a defensive reputation over that terrain sector that altered Russian operational planning for the Zaporizhzhia direction through at least mid-May. A single engagement that reconfigured an enemy's operational calculus for weeks. That's what decisive tactical action at the brigade level actually looks like. The engagement also validated several aspects of Ukrainian combined arms defensive doctrine that had been developing since 2022 but had not previously been demonstrated at this scale in a single engagement. The integration of fire and maneuver at the Stugna team level, the ability to engage, displace, and re-engage under artillery response without losing tactical coherence, showed a degree of small unit adaptability that surpassed what Russian commanders had modeled. The pre-positioning of alternative logistics caches, the FPV drone team's ability to switch frequencies and maintain pressure against active Russian EW, the Bradley section's successful repositioning to address the QRF threat, each represented a tactical capability that Russian planning had not adequately accounted for. Collectively, they produced a result that was, in military terms, near total. Will operations like this, combined arms defensive killing grounds using integrated drone, missile, and IFV fire, become the defining template for Ukrainian brigade-level defense in 2026? Comment yes or no. Because in the next war vector breakdown, we're covering a Ukrainian Special Forces operation where the equipment, the approach, and the outcome look very different. And the comparison will change how you think about what winning means on this front. Now, the answer to the quiz. How many armored vehicles did Ukraine destroy or put out of action? The full answer is C, all 22 original column vehicles plus 4 of 6 QRF vehicles, for a total of 26 vehicles from the combined Russian force. The original column, 19 destroyed outright, 3 captured intact. The QRF, 4 destroyed or immobilized, 2 escaped. No vehicle from the original flanking column successfully withdrew. That number, 0 escapes from the primary force, is what makes this engagement exceptional. Killing zones where all primary force vehicles are accounted for are extraordinarily rare in modern mechanized warfare. The 47th achieved one. Was the brigade commander's decision to use 3 weeks of preparation time rather than request reinforcements the right call? Given that reinforcement requests might have triggered Russian surveillance and compromised the ambush, probably yes. But it was a significant gamble. Had Russian timing been different, had the attack come before all positions were fully established, the outcome could have been catastrophic for the 47th. Could the Russian 58th Army have prevented this? Almost certainly, with better reconnaissance that detected the Ukrainian repositioning during those 3 weeks of preparation. The failure to identify what the 47th was building along that ridgeline is the operational error that made everything else possible. What would you have done differently, as the Ukrainian commander building the defense, or as the Russian column commander when contact was made? The answers aren't simple. Real warfare rarely is. Subscribe to War Vector, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The ones where preparation, innovation, and tactical discipline produced outcomes that changed the shape of the front. Real tactics, real consequences. War Vector. The corridor south of Orikhiv is quiet now. The wrecked hulls of Russian T-80s still mark the ground where the column stopped, their turrets blown clear by the violence of secondary explosions, their armor a permanent record of what happens when modern combined arms defense meets overconfident operational planning. The Stugna craters on the ridgeline face, the displaced earth where Ukrainian teams repositioned under fire, the abandoned equipment that Ukrainian forces recovered in the hours after the battle. All of it remains. Silent confirmation that in this war, as in every war, preparation is the weapon that wins before the first shot fires.